The freighter engine had been dead for 6 years and it still smelled like burning copper. Ren Holloway did not mind. Dead engines made sense to him. They had reasons for being broken. You found the reason, you fixed it, and the world was a little less wrong than before. Simple, clean, honest work. He was on his back under the port thruster housing when he heard it. Not wind, not the usual groan of old metal settling in the heat. Something else. A sound that started and stopped, like whatever was making it had decided halfway through that making noise was a bad idea. Ren stayed still. The salvage yard behind his shop was full of old colony freighters, cracked hull plating, and towers of scrap sorted by material type. Things lived in there sometimes. Feral kethbirds mostly, with their 6 legs and their habit of stealing small tools. Once, a sand crawler big enough to eat a kethbird whole. He heard it again, closer to the back wall, near the collapsed cargo sled that had been sitting there since before he bought the yard. Ren set down his torque wrench and crawled out from under the engine. He wiped his hands on his work pants, which did nothing useful since his pants were already the color of engine grease. He walked slowly toward the back wall, not rushing. The way he moved around machinery, he did not fully understand yet. The albino dragon was wedged under the edge of the cargo sled. Ren stopped walking. She was the size of a large dog, roughly, though her folded wings added width that made her look bigger at first. White. Not pale white, the way fresh weld seam was white before it cooled. Her scales had a faint blue tint at the edges where the morning light caught them. Her front half was pressed low to the ground, one pale eye fixed on Ren, completely unblinking. Her back half was not moving at all. He had seen Vrethkai before. Everyone on Duskfall had. They flew over the eastern ridge sometimes, far up, their shadows crossing the scrubland like slow clouds. They did not come into the colony. There were rules about that on both sides. This one was a hatchling. He did not know much about Vrethkai biology, but he knew young when he saw it. And he knew paralysis. He had seen what a crushed drive shaft did to a transport's rear axle. Whatever had happened to this animal, the back half of her was not receiving the signal the front half was sending. She was dragging herself, had been dragging herself, by the look of the torn earth between her and the sled. She had come a long way on 2 working limbs and a lot of something that was probably pain. Ren did not move for a while. He stood at about 4 meters distance and looked at her, and she looked at him. The pale eye did not show fear exactly. It showed calculation. The same look a machine gave you in a way when you had not found the problem yet, but the problem knew you were looking. He crouched down slowly. He picked up a piece of scrap rod from the ground next to his boot and set it back down, not threatening, just showing her his hands were doing things that were not aimed at her. She watched his hands. He thought about calling the Colonial Wildlife Office. He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds before he looked at the drag marks again. The Wildlife Office would call the compact. The compact had very clear rules about Vrethkai hatchlings. The rules did not involve saving them. Ren went into the shop and came back with 2 lengths of flat aluminum brace rod, a roll of composite strapping cable, and a piece of soft packing foam cut from a shipping crate. He sat down in the dirt about 2 meters from the hatchling and started bending one of the rods with his hands. She did not move, she watched. He worked slowly. He talked while he worked, not to her specifically, just in the way he talked to himself when he was figuring out a problem, saying the steps out loud, checking his own logic by hearing it in the air. The brace he built was ugly. The foam padding was held on with 3 different widths of strapping cable. The rod angles were eyeballed because he had no measurements, and she was not the sort of patient who would hold still for a tape measure. It looked like something built by a man who was making it up as he went, which was accurate. When he shuffled forward on his knees and reached toward her hindquarters, she made a sound low in her chest. Not a hiss, more like a question. He kept moving, slow, steady. He fitted the brace along her lower spine and strapped it carefully, checking the pressure by feel the way he checked torque by feel, years of doing it until the hands knew before the brain confirmed. She shuddered once. Her front claws dug into the dirt. She did not pull away. When he was done, he sat back and waited. She tried. Her back legs moved not much, maybe 5 degrees of motion where there had been 0 before, but they moved. She got one hind foot under herself, then the other. She did not stand, but she stopped being completely flat against the ground. Ren looked at that small change for a moment. Then he stood up, picked up his tools, and walked back toward the shop. "Come on then," he said, without looking back. He heard the slow drag-in push of her following him across the yard. He did not look back because he did not want to make it a big thing. He pulled the hull plating aside that covered the rear storage space and left the gap open. That night he sat outside the storage space in an old folding chair with a mug of something warm that had gone cold an hour ago. Inside, he could hear her breathing. Slow, steady, not panicked. He had a napkin in his lap. He was sketching something, a different kind of brace, one with articulated joints at the hip socket. Ren was not a man who did things halfway. The first week, Ren lost 4 protein packs, a hydraulic wrench, 2 meters of copper wire, and 1 boot to the hatchling in the back room. She did not eat the boot. She just relocated it to a place he could not find without moving 3 crates of engine parts. He found the wire wound carefully around a stack of hull bolts in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. He was starting to think the word almost was doing a lot of work. On the 8th day, he contacted Dava. Dava ran a medical supply depot 3 streets over from the yard. She was the kind of person who kept extra stock of everything because she had grown up somewhere that ran out of things regularly, and she had never fully believed that problem was behind her. She answered his call while clearly in the middle of inventory, a scanning wand in one hand and a flatbread in the other. Ren told her he needed nerve stimulators, veterinary grade, the kind used for large muscle groups. For a feral animal with spinal compression, he said, a large one. Dava looked at him over the call. How large? Largish. What kind of animal? Big cat type situation, Ren said. There was a pause. Ren, Duskfall does not have any big cats. Big cat adjacent, he said. Dava looked at him for another long moment, and then said she would bring the supplies that evening, and that he was going to tell her the truth when she got there. He spent the time between the call and her arrival building the second brace, the articulated one from the napkin sketch. He had pulled aluminum tubing from a landing strut scrap pile, milled the joints himself on the old lathe in the corner, and cut foam padding into proper fitted shapes. It was still ugly, but it was a different kind of ugly, the kind that had been thought through. Sora watched him from the storage room doorway. He had started calling her that in his head 4 days ago and had slipped and said it out loud twice. She had moved her head slightly both times. That probably meant nothing. He noted it anyway. When Dava arrived, she walked through the shop, followed the sound, and stood in the doorway of the storage room for a long time without saying anything. Sora sat on a folded tarp in the corner, her new brace fitted along her lower back and hips, one pale eye watching the new human with steady calm. Ren, Dava said. Yeah. That is a Vrethkai hatchling. Yeah. That is a critically endangered apex predator, whose young are protected under compact law, and whose presence in a private commercial facility is punishable by permanent colony exile. I know. She also, Dava said, looks like she is doing a good job pretending she does not know we are talking about her. Sora's eye moved very slowly between the two of them. Dava handed over the supplies without further argument, which was the most human thing she ever did, and then spent the next 2 hours helping calibrate the nerve stimulators, while Ren explained the brace mechanism, and Sora ate the flatbread Dava had been carrying since inventory and had forgotten was still in her coat pocket. The stimulators worked on the second calibration attempt. Not perfectly. The signal was fuzzy where the nerve bundle was most compressed, and Ren had to reroute the feedback path twice. But Sora's hind legs began responding with real weight and real intention, not just the faint twitch the first brace had produced. She stood up. Fully, all 4 legs. Her head came up and her wings shifted slightly for balance, instinct doing what it was built to do. She was still low and her back legs trembled, but she was standing, and she stayed standing for almost a full minute before she sat back down with the deliberate care of someone who had decided sitting was her idea. Neither Ren nor Dava said anything. The moment felt like the kind that broke if you touched it. Then Dava said, "You absolute idiot." "Yeah," Ren said. "You complete, reckless, technically impressive idiot." The joint tolerances came out pretty well. Dava laughed, short and almost angry, and then she helped him adjust the hip strapping for better load distribution, and they did not talk about the compact for the rest of the evening. The problem arrived the next morning in the form of Alex, the Trelawney administrator for the colony's eastern district. He was six-limbed and thin, with the faint blue-green coloring of a Trelawney in what passed for good health, and he had the particular careful patience of a bureaucrat who had learned that patience won more situations than noise. He told Ren that the grid management office had flagged unusual power draws from the yard over the past week, medical-grade equipment signatures. He said this without accusation, simply as information, the way a careful person hands you something fragile. Ren said he had been running diagnostics on some old medical cargo he was evaluating for resale. Alex looked at the yard. He looked at the storage room door, which was closed. He looked at Ren. He had compound eyes that caught light in small, scattered pieces, which made it difficult to tell exactly where he was looking at any given time, which Ren suspected was not accidental in Trelawney faces. Alex said he would file the report as a minor commercial variance and check back in 10 days. He left. Ren stood in the yard and breathed out very slowly. Inside the storage room, something shifted against the hull plating, and something else made a small sound that was probably not a word, but was structured like one. Ren went back to work. He had 12 days before the next compact circuit check, which meant he had 11 days to build something that actually helped Sora walk without the brace, showing power consumption on the grid. He had built worse things under worse deadlines. He went to the lathe. The two compact officers landed on a Tuesday, which Ren always thought was the worst day for bad news, because it was too far from the weekend in either direction to feel survivable. Their names were Breck and Odie, both Trelawney, both wearing the gray and copper uniforms of the Interspecies Compact Enforcement Division, which had been designed, as far as Ren could tell, specifically to make everyone in a room feel slightly guilty even if they had done nothing wrong. Ren, who had done several things wrong, felt this effect quite strongly. They sat across from him in the shop office while Sora was, theoretically, hidden behind the reinforced inner wall he had built 2 weeks ago. The wall was solid. The ventilation gap at the top was less solid. He was watching Odie's antennae, which were doing something subtle and directional. Breck read from a data slate. Unauthorized housing of a protected species. Grid variance violations. Possible sapience assessment evasion, which was a charge Ren had not known existed until approximately 48 hours ago when Dava had found the relevant statute and sent it to him with a note that just said, "Read this, read all of it." Ren said he wanted to request a formal sapience assessment before any removal order was processed. Breck stopped reading. Odie's antennae went very still. Breck explained, with the particular careful politeness of someone explaining something obvious to someone they suspected was not stupid, that sapience assessments were for sapient species, that Vrethkai hatchlings were not assessed because Vrethkai sapients did not develop until approximately their 3rd year of growth, that requesting an assessment at this stage was. The law says any individual displaying functional communication intent may request assessment regardless of species age, Dava said from the doorway. Both officers turned. Dava walked in, set a data pad on the desk with the relevant statute highlighted in orange, and sat down in the 3rd chair as if she had been invited. Section 14, subsection 9, she said. Compact Standard Code, Revision 12. There was a long silence. Breck read Section 14, Subsection 9. Odie's antennae began moving again, very slowly, in a direction that might have been concern. The assessment was scheduled for that afternoon because compact regulations, once invoked correctly, moved on specific timelines whether the officers liked it or not. Breck and Odie set up their standard assessment board in the main work bay, which was the largest clear space in the shop. The board was a flat panel covered in communication symbols, organized by category: needs, observations, social signals, abstract concepts, standard across 12 species, never tested on Vreth. Ren brought Sora out. The officers went very quiet in a way that was different from the quiet they had been doing before. This was the quiet of two trained professionals doing rapid recalculation. Sora walked in on her own and stood in the middle of the bay and looked at the assessment board for a while. She looked at Breck. She looked at Odie. She looked at the board again with the expression she had been using lately when she encountered something new and was deciding whether it was interesting or not. She walked past the assessment board entirely and went to Ren's main workbench. Ren had been very careful not to clear the workbench. It looked the way it always looked: organized chaos, parts sorted by size and function in a system that made sense only to him and apparently Sora. She sat down in front of the bench. She reached out with one forepaw, carefully, with the delicacy she had developed over weeks of handling small components, and picked up a fuel injector housing. She set it on the clear space at the front of the bench. Then she picked up the internal mesh filter, set it next to the housing, the seal ring, the alignment bolt, the secondary filter, the cap. 6 components, in order, the exact order Ren used to reassemble that particular type of injector, which he had done twice in the last month while she watched. She looked at Breck. She did it again, faster this time, housing, mesh, seal, bolt, secondary, cap. Then she looked at Odie. Ren said nothing. The shop was very quiet. Breck was writing something on his data slate with the speed of a person who was no longer sure what box he was trying to fill in. Odie had turned slightly away, which in Trelawney body language meant intense internal processing. "That is," Breck said carefully, "object sequence recognition. It is not technically language." "Section 14 does not require language," Dava said. "It requires functional communication intent." She demonstrated a learned procedural sequence and directed it at you specifically. Twice. That is intent, and it is directed, which meets the threshold for inconclusive assessment. "Inconclusive," Breck said. "Which means," Dava said, "that under compact standard code, removal is suspended pending full review, which takes, 90 days minimum." Breck looked at Odie. Odie looked at Breck. The antennae conversation between them was brief and not translatable, but its tone was readable. Breck stamped the assessment form as inconclusive. He told Ren that a review board would be assigned, and that the yard would be subject to monthly compliance checks, and that Ren should under no circumstances attempt to move or relocate the animal, and that this was not over. Ren said he understood and thanked them for their time, and walked them to the yard gate with the steady, unhurried manner of a man who had not just won something with 48 hours of frantic statute reading, and one dragon who apparently paid attention. When he came back inside, Dava was sitting on the floor with her back against the workbench. Sora had put her head on Dava's knee. Dava was not crying. She was just breathing very carefully. Sora was still looking at the door, pale eyes tracking where the officers had gone. Ren picked up the fuel injector components and began putting them away properly. He was not a man who talked about feelings. But he reached over without looking and rested one hand briefly on the flat of Sora's back, between her folded wings. She pressed back slightly, just enough to let him know she felt it. 90 days. He had 90 days to figure out the rest. He had worked with worse timelines. The 38th attempt ended the same way as the 37th, which ended the same way as the 29th. Sora ran hard across the open scrubland east of the yard, wings spreading at full extension, the ground dropping away beneath her for exactly 3 seconds, and then something in the signal chain between instinct and motion went quiet, and she came down in a controlled fall that she turned into a slide and a skid, and a lot of displaced dirt. Ren counted every attempt. He did not know why, he just did. He was watching from the flat rock he used as an observation point, while Sen, beside him, was taking notes on a pad, with all 6 of his arms doing something simultaneously, the way Trelawney did when they were genuinely engaged with a problem. Sen was 26 years old by colonial standard, and officially a structural engineer for the colony's infrastructure office. Unofficially, he had been coming to the yard 3 times a week for 4 months because the brace engineering was, in his exact words, the most interesting problem currently on this planet. Sora shook dirt from her face and looked back at them. "The nerve reroute is holding," Sen said. "The signal reaches the flight cluster. Something stops it at the secondary relay." "Like a switch that only closes halfway," Ren said. "Yes, a switch that knows it should close and cannot remember how to finish the motion." Ren had been thinking about this for 2 weeks. He had been thinking about it the way he thought about a machine problem, not emotionally, not with frustration, just with the flat, steady attention of a man who believed that everything broken had a reason, and every reason had a solution if you looked long enough. The thing about the flight instinct in large flying animals was that it was not one signal. It was a sequence. Each part of the body had to confirm the previous part before the next one fired. Wings confirm, chest muscles confirm, hip joints confirm, hind legs confirm, and then the whole system opened and the animal was airborne. In Sora's case, the confirmation chain reached the hind legs and found them uncertain. They worked now, had worked for months, but they carried the memory of not working, and that memory was sitting in the nerve pathway like old rust in a fuel line. What Sora needed was not stronger signal. She needed the system to stop asking the hind legs for permission. Ren explained this to Sen, using the fuel line metaphor. Sen spent a long time looking at his notes. Then he said, "You want to bypass the confirmation check for the hind leg relay. Temporarily, just for the ignition sequence. Once she's airborne, the hind legs can do whatever they want. You want to modify the brace to send an automatic confirmation signal from the hind leg, relay regardless of what the hind legs are actually doing at the moment of takeoff." Yes. So the brain believes the hind legs are confident even if they are hesitating. So she stops waiting for permission from the part of herself that doesn't trust itself yet. Sen was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at Sora, who had walked back to the scrubland's edge and was standing at the start line she had worn into the ground over 38 attempts. Her pale eyes were on the horizon, not defeated, measuring. "That is," Sen said, "a remarkably strange way to solve a neurological problem." "It's how you start an engine that thinks it's flooded," Ren said. "You tell it it's fine. Sometimes that's enough." The modification took 3 days. The new brace component was small, a secondary transmitter no bigger than Ren's thumbnail, fitted into the hip joint housing, calibrated to broadcast a steady confirmation tone through the nerve channel at the moment Sora's front legs left the ground. It would send that signal whether or not the hind legs were ready. It would tell the flight instinct, "Everything is confirmed, the sequence is complete, you may proceed." The colony knew about Sora by then. There was no hiding a dragon the size of a ground transport who used the eastern scrubland as a running track. Most colonists kept their distance, not out of hostility, just the particular careful respect people developed for large things that had not hurt anyone yet. A few of the children left things near the yard gate. Dried meat from the market. Drawings done on paper with very enthusiastic crayon. One child left a small wrench, which Ren considered the most accurate gift he had ever witnessed. Sora ignored most of this, the wrench she kept. The 39th attempt happened on a morning that was neither remarkable nor planned. Sora simply walked to the scrubland, stood at the line, and looked back at Ren with an expression he had learned to read as, "Are we doing this?" Ren gave her the one nod he used for yes. She ran, Harder than before and differently, not desperate, not straining, but committed, the way a machine sounds when everything is timed correctly and the power is going exactly where it needs to go. Her wings came out at full spread, and the sound they made was like a hull plate hitting atmosphere, a deep flat concussion that Ren felt in his chest. Her front legs left the ground. The new transmitter fired. Her hind legs did not hesitate. She went up. Not 3 seconds, not a controlled fall. She went up through the low morning cloud layer and kept going, her white shape shrinking against the pale sky until it was the size of a bird, then smaller, then gone. Ren stood on the flat rock with his hands in his pockets. Sen had stopped writing. The scrubland was very quiet. The distance made no sound at all. 2 hours and 11 minutes later, Sora came back. She came in fast from the upper atmosphere, pulling her wings tight on descent, and when she flared for landing she took out the east fence, a storage shed, and a stack of hull plating that Ren had sorted twice already. She stood in the wreckage and looked at Ren. Her scales were still cold from altitude. Her pale eyes were brighter than he had ever seen them. Ren looked at the demolished fence. He looked at Sora. "Your approach angle was 40 degrees too steep," he said. She made a sound. He had heard it once before, the first night in the storage room. It was not in any Vrethkai record. It was low and warm, and it rolled out of her chest like something that had been waiting for a reason to exist. He was almost certain it was laughter. There was no warning, no flight path filed with the colony authority, no diplomatic signal sent ahead through the compact's communication network. One moment the eastern sky over Duskfall was clear and pale and ordinary, and the next moment it had a shadow in it the size of a low-altitude freight platform, and the shadow had wings. The market district saw her first. She came down through the upper air in a long, controlled descent that scattered every Kethbird on Duskfall into panicked clouds, and she landed in the center of the open market with the deliberate precision of something that had never had a reason to rush and knew it. She was 3 times Sora's size. Her scales were deep gray with an undercolor of dull gold that showed when she moved. Her wings folded with a sound like tarp cables snapping taut. She sat in the wreckage of 2 market stalls and 1 public water station and waited. Her name, Sen told Ren over the emergency comm line in a voice that was doing its best not to shake, was Vel, matriarch of the Eastern Range, the oldest Vrethkai in active territorial record. She had a translation chip in her jaw that was older than most of the buildings in the colony, and she had not used it in 11 years, which meant the last time she had spoken to anyone outside her species, something significant had happened. Alex ordered evacuation of the market district and then called Ren. He did not ask Ren to do anything. He simply said, "She is there, and Ren has the most contact experience with Vrethkai of any resident on Duskfall, which was technically true since his contact experience numbered exactly 1 and lasted 14 months. Ren walked to the market district. He did not have a plan. He had found over his life that plans were for situations you understood, and this was not that. The market was empty. Food sat half-packed on abandoned stalls. A child's shoe was in the middle of the path. Vel was at the far end of the open plaza, her head lowered slightly, watching him approach. Ren stopped at a distance he judged to be respectful and looked at her. She was enormous. The word did not cover it. She was the kind of large that changes how the air feels around it. Her eyes were deep amber, not pale like Sora's, and they moved over him with slow thoroughness. The translation chip in her jaw activated with a sound like old machinery finding its rhythm. Her voice, when it came, was not the voice of the chip. It was her voice, low and resonant, and the chip translated it into colonial standard with a slight delay that felt like the space between lightning and thunder. She said, "Where is the aberrant one?" Ren said, "Her name is Sora, and she's not aberrant." Vel regarded him the way large ancient things regarded small new things, not with contempt exactly, but with the particular patience of something that has lived long enough to know that small things sometimes had points worth hearing. She said, "The paralyzed one, The one that should not have lived. The one who learned to fly anyway, Ren said. There was a pause. Vel's eyes moved over him again, differently this time. She said, "You are the one who kept her." She kept herself. I fixed a mechanical problem. She said she is not a mechanical problem. She is a Vrethkai. She was born wrong. The line does not carry weakness forward. This is not cruelty. It is preservation. In my experience, Ren said, the things people call weakness usually turn out to be a different kind of strong that nobody cataloged yet. Vel did not respond immediately. The translation chip was quiet. Somewhere above the cloud layer, something moved. Sora came down out of the sky. She did not come gently. She came the way she always came back from altitude, now fast, committed, wings pulling hard at the last moment, landing with enough force to crack the market stone paving in 2 places. She was between Ren and Vel before the debris finished settling, turned sideways, one wing slightly extended like a wall. The size difference was vast. Vel could have stepped over Sora without bending her neck. Sora knew this. She did not move. Vel spoke in Vrethkai, the actual language, deep sounds that had no human equivalent. Sen's voice came through the earpiece Ren was wearing, halting and pale compared to the original. She is telling Sora that survival is not the same as worth. That what Sora is, built on alien tools and kept by alien hands, is not what a Vrethkai is supposed to be. Sora was quiet for a long time. Ren could see her breathing, the slow rise and fall of her ribs, the way her wing adjusted slightly like a machine making small corrections. She turned her head and looked at Ren. Not for permission, not for rescue, just the way a person looks at someone they trust before they say something true. Then she answered Vel in Vrethkai, and Sen's translation came through slowly, carefully, like he was afraid of breaking the words by moving them too fast. She said, I know what I am. I am the first one who was fixed. I am the first one who chose to stay. I am the first one who learned that help is not weakness and that the one who holds the tool is not lesser than the one who swings the claw. I know what I am not supposed to be. I am it anyway. Then she said, and I choose who my people are. The plaza was very quiet. The Kethbirds had not come back. The empty market stalls stood around them like witnesses. Vel looked at Sora for a long time. Her amber eyes moved over every part of the hatchling she had last seen as an abandoned, paralyzed thing in an eastern scrubland. She looked at the brace, which was barely visible now beneath Sora's grown scales. She looked at the way Sora stood balanced, steady, no tremor in the hind legs, the old uncertainty gone entirely. Then Vel spoke one word only, and Sen translated it with a pause before and after it like he was making room for it. He said she called her heir of a new line. Vel spread her wings. The wind she made flattened everything loose in the market. She went up in 4 strokes, steep and fast, and the shadow lifted off duskfall and shrank and was gone. Ren stood in the broken plaza with pieces of market stall around his boots and Sora behind him, and his heart doing something he did not have a word for. Alex arrived at the edge of the market district, looked at the destruction, looked at Sora, and then sat down on the ground exactly where he was standing. He did not appear to have planned to do this. His legs simply decided. Dava came running 3 minutes later and stopped when she saw everyone just standing and sitting in the rubble. What did I miss? She said. Nothing, Ren said, everything. Sora lowered her head and bumped it against Ren's shoulder. Once, gently, the way she had started doing when she wanted him to know something she did not have words for yet. He put his hand on the side of her face and left it there. Sora left on a clear morning without ceremony. She simply walked out of the yard at first light, spread her wings at the east edge of the scrubland, and went up until duskfall's cloud layer took her, and then she was gone. Ren stood in the yard with a mug of cold coffee and watched the clouds for a while. Then he went inside and started work on a cracked stabilizer housing that had been waiting 2 weeks for his attention. 8 months passed. He took on 2 apprentices, a young human named Pell who broke 3 things for everyone he fixed but learned fast, and a Trelawney named Goss who had the natural mechanical patience of her species, and the unfortunate habit of organizing his parts bins by color rather than function, which Wren corrected several times before accepting that two organizational systems could coexist. The yard expanded. He bought the empty lot to the south and filled it with more salvage and a second lathe. Dava came by most weeks. Alex stopped in occasionally with forms that needed signing and stayed for longer than the forms required. Sen sent updates from wherever Sen was, which changed often since the Vrethkai cultural liaison position had turned out to be a genuinely necessary job. The updates from Sen were how Wren knew what Sora was doing. She had gone to Vrethkai territory. She had not gone to fight for her place, which was the traditional path. She had gone and observed, the way Wren had taught her by example, watching before touching, understanding before adjusting. She listened to territorial disputes between lines and asked questions that nobody had thought to ask. She found two resource conflicts that had been running for 40 years, and solved them by pointing out that neither side was actually using the resources they were fighting over. They were fighting over the principle of having them. Sen described this in his reports, with the barely contained excitement of someone watching history get rewritten by accident. The compact formal review concluded in month 4. The review board, after 90 days of deliberation and 3 emergency sessions prompted by Alex's quietly persistent procedural interventions, ruled that Sora qualified as a sapient individual under Section 14. It was the first time the clause had been successfully applied to a non-registered species. The decision created a legal precedent that immediately generated responses from 7 other systems, 4 academic institutions, and 1 very long formal complaint from an administrator in the Outer Rim who had apparently been waiting for a reason to file it. Breck and Odie, who had been assigned to draft the review board's summary report, were listed as co-authors on a paper about it that was published in the Compact's official legal journal. Their names appeared under the title, Sapience, Intent, and the Fuel Injector Problem. Wren did not read academic papers, but Dava read him the abstract out loud while he worked, and he made no comment except to say the title was good. In month 6, Vel made a formal announcement in Vrethkai territory that recognized Sora as the founding regent of a new subline. The albino coloring, which in old Vrethkai tradition meant uncertain fortune, was renamed in the record, the mark of the fixed. It meant, in rough translation, one who was remade and chose to become more than the remaking. In month 8, a shadow crossed the yard. Wren was inside the south extension, flat on his back under a cargo lifter with a corroded motivator housing he had been fighting for 2 hours. He heard Pell make a sound that was not a word. He heard Goss click her mandibles sharply, which was Trelawney for involuntary surprise. He heard the sound the yard made when something very large landed in it, which he recognized the way a person recognizes the sound of their own door. He did not hurry. He finished the motivator mount, tightened the last bolt, and slid out from under the lifter. He wiped his hands. He walked to the yard door. Sora filled most of the yard. She had grown again. She was broader across the chest. Her wings folded tight and high, her coloring as white as ever but with a deeper blue at the scale edges that he had not seen before. The brace was gone. Had been gone for over a year, Sen had mentioned. She no longer needed it. The nerve pathway had finished what he had started. She was looking at him. Pell was pressed against the far wall doing something complicated with his face. Goss had organized herself into a compact Trelawney stillness that meant she was paying complete attention to everything simultaneously. Sora held something in her forepaws. She extended them toward Wren, slowly, and opened them. It was a carved piece of metal, dark, heavy, worked with the kind of patient detail that took a long time and something sharp. The shape was 2 things wound together, a wrench and a wing, sharing the same center point, neither one dominant. It was Vrethkai craftwork. He could see the tool marks. She had made it herself. Wren took it. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the detail work along the wing edge where the carving had been done in a thin, repeated line that, up close, was a sequence. The same six-component assembly sequence she had demonstrated in front of Breck, and Odie the day she had bought them 90 days of time. He looked up at her. "Your landing approach is still sloppy," he said. Sora made the sound, the warm rolling sound from her chest that no Vrethkai record had documented before him. It was bigger now. It filled the yard. Pell jumped. Goss clicked twice rapidly, which meant she found something genuinely funny. Later that evening, Sora communicated through Sen's translation interface, which she had learned to use directly without Sen present. She asked Ren if he would fly with her. She had asked before, twice in the months before she left. He had said no both times, not from fear, or not mostly from fear, but from the feeling that it was her thing, her sky, and some things should stay separate. He said yes this time. She took him up just before dark, when Duskfall's 2 moons were rising and the air was cold, and the colony below was becoming a pattern of lights rather than a place. She flew steady and smooth, nothing like the crashing landings of her early attempts, her body reading the air with the full knowledge of something that belonged there. Ren held on and looked out at the galaxy, and did not say anything for a long time. Below, the colony was small. The yard was a rectangle of light he could cover with his thumb. The scrubland where she had run and fallen and gotten up and run again was a dark curve at the edge of town. The ridge the Vrethkai used to fly over, far up, untouchable, was below them now. Sora's wings moved in long steady pulls, unhurried. Ren had spent his whole life fixing things that were broken and leaving them better than he found them and moving to the next broken thing. He had not thought of it as anything larger than that. Just work. Just the next problem. Just what you did when something needed doing and you happened to be standing there. He looked out at the stars and thought about that for a while. When they came back down, Sora landed in the scrubland with more grace than she had ever managed before. A long glide and a soft touchdown that barely disturbed the dirt. Ren climbed down and stood on solid ground, and his legs were unreliable for a moment in the way of a person returning from somewhere that changed the scale of things. Sora folded her wings and sat beside him, and they stayed there in the dark for a while, the mechanic and the sky regent, saying nothing at all. The compact records would note, in a footnote nobody requested, that the region of the mark of the fixed line maintained one unusual practice throughout her rule. Once each year she returned to a salvage yard on a small colony world on the midrim and spent 3 days there, moving parts, watching work, occasionally demolishing a fence on landing. The yard's owner was documented as neither intimidated by her presence nor particularly impressed by her title. The footnote concluded, the nature of the relationship between the regent and the mechanic was not classifiable under any existing compact category. A junior researcher had added, in handwriting, at the bottom of the archived copy, some things don't need a category. Nobody deleted it.